Welcome to Grandpa Explains. Come in, settle yourself. There is no hurry here tonight, none at all. Wherever you are right now, lying in your bed with the lamp turned low, or curled on the couch with the day finally behind you, or somewhere in the dark with your eyes already half closed, you are exactly where you need to be. You do not have to sit up. You do not have to follow along. You do not have to remember a single word I say. This is not a lesson you will be tested on. It is more like sitting by a warm window while someone older tells you slow stories until the night carries you off. And I want to say this plainly before we go any further, because I think it matters. You do not need to know anything about Carl Jung to listen tonight. You do not need to know anything about psychology or dreams or any of the long words that get attached to these things. If you have never read a book on the mind in your life, you are perfectly welcome here. If you fell asleep in school whenever someone said the word subconscious, you are welcome here. We're going to take all of it slowly and gently, and I will explain every strange term the moment it appears. In plain words, the kind of words you would use to tell a friend about your day. There is nothing to figure out. There is nowhere else you need to be. If you feel like it, and only if you feel like it, you might leave a little note to say what time it is where you are and what corner of the world you are listening from. I always find it a quiet comfort. The thought of all of us scattered across the dark, in different cities, under different skies, listening to the same slow voice as the night settles in. But that is for later, or for never. For now, there is just this. So let us begin the way we always begin. Take a slow, deep breath, in through the nose if you can. Let the air come all the way down, past your chest, into your belly, the way it did when you were small and didn't have to think about it. And then let it go, long and easy. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they have been hiding all day, up around your ears. Let your jaw unclench. Let your tongue rest soft in your mouth. Notice the weight of your own body just for a moment, how the bed or the chair is holding you up, how you do not have to do a single thing to be held. The floor holds the bed, the earth holds the house, and you are held by all of it right now without having to lift a finger. Good. Now let me tell you the strange and beautiful thing we are going to sit with tonight. There is a figure that visits a great many of us in our dreams. Maybe it has visited you. A stranger, someone you do not recognize, and yet somehow you know they are dangerous. They are chasing you perhaps down a long hallway, or through a house with too many rooms, or across a field where your legs will not move the way you want them to. You run and your heart pounds, even in sleep, and you wake with your chest tight and the feeling of having only just escaped something terrible. We have all met some version of this figure, the pursuer, the shadowy stranger, the one we are running from. And here is the thing I want you to carry softly into your sleep tonight. According to the man we are going to spend these hours with, that threatening stranger chasing you through your nightmares is almost certainly a part of you. Not a real person come to hunt you, not a monster from outside, a piece of yourself, a piece you have not looked at or have pushed away or have refused to claim. And so it comes back at night in the dark, wearing the face of a stranger, asking to be seen. I know it is a strange and unsettling idea to lie down with, but stay with me because it is also in the end a tender one, because if the frightening figure in your dream is you, then the dream is not an attack. It is a kind of homecoming. It is a part of yourself trying, in the only language it has, to find its way back to you. The man who thought all of this through, who gave his whole long life to understanding what happens behind our closed eyes, was named Carl Gustav Jung. He was a Swiss psychiatrist, that is simply a doctor of the mind, and he lived from the year 1875 to the year 1961. A long life, 85 years, most of it spent leaning close to the strange country of dreams and listening, the way you might lean close to a child who is trying to tell you something important in words they have only half learned. Jung founded what came to be called analytical psychology. Do not let the size of those words trouble you. It simply means his particular way of understanding the human soul, the deep, hidden parts of us, the parts we do not usually see by daylight. And of all the things he studied in his long life, dreams were close to the very center. He wrote about them again and again. There is one essay of his we will return to tonight called On the Nature of Dreams, which he wrote and then revised in the years 1945 and 1948. And near the very end of his life, an old man looking back over everything, he sat with a kind woman named Aniela Jaffe, who helped him gather his memories into a book called Memories, Dreams, Reflections. It came out in 1962, the year after he died. In its pages, he tells his own dreams, the ones that frightened him, the ones that changed him, the ones that he never fully understood, even after a lifetime of trying. That is the kind of man he was. Honest enough to admit what he did not know. So that is who is keeping us company tonight. Carl Gustav Jung, 1875 to 1961, a doctor of the soul, a man who believed that the dreams which visit you in the dark are not nonsense, not random sparks, not the leftover noise of the day, but messages, honest messages, from a part of yourself you do not usually get to hear from. Now let me give you the heart of it, the single idea that everything else tonight will grow out of. If you remember nothing else, and remember, you do not have to remember anything, let this one settle into you like a stone settling to the bottom of a still pond. Jung believed the main job of a dream is to compensate. Compensate, it is a plain word really, even if it sounds a little formal. To compensate is to make up for something that is missing, to balance it out. If you lean too far to one side of a small boat, you lean to the other to keep from tipping over. But that leaning back is compensation. If a table has one short leg, you slip a folded bit of paper under it to make it level, as that paper is compensating for what the leg lacks. To compensate is simply to add what is missing so that the whole thing can come back into balance. And that, said Jung, is what your dream is doing night after night. It is adding what your waking life has left out. He had a way of saying it that I want to give you in his own words because they are lovely, and because saying them slowly is itself a kind of rest. Jung said the dream is a spontaneous self-portrayal in symbolic form of the actual situation in the unconscious. Let me take that apart gently, one piece at a time, the way you would peel an orange in the quiet. A self-portrayal, a self-portrait. The dream is the psyche painting a picture of itself, the way an artist might sit before a mirror and paint their own face. It is not hiding, it is showing. It is saying, here is what I look like right now on the inside. Spontaneous, meaning it is not planned, not arranged, not faked. It happens on its own, the way a yawn happens, the way a blush happens. You cannot make yourself dream a particular thing any more than you can make yourself blush on command. It rises up from somewhere deeper than you're willing, and that is what makes it honest. It has no reason to lie. In symbolic form, meaning it speaks in pictures, in images, in little scenes and strange happenings, rather than in plain sentences. A symbol is just a picture that stands for something more. The way a wedding ring is a small circle of gold that stands for something far larger than itself. The dream does not say in words, "Oh, you are afraid of growing old." It shows you a withering tree, or a clock with no hands, or a house falling into ruin. It paints, it does not lecture. And of the actual situation in the unconscious. The unconscious. There, I said the long word. but it is not frightening. The unconscious is simply all the parts of your mind that you are not aware of right now. Everything you are not thinking about. Everything you have forgotten or pushed down or never quite noticed. It is enormous, far larger than the small lit room of your waking attention. And the dream, said Jung, gives you an honest report of what is going on down there in the dark, vast part of yourself. The actual situation. Not a flattering version, not a frightening version made up to scare you, the real one. So put it all together and you have this. The dream is an honest, spontaneous self-portrait, painted in pictures of how things truly stand in the hidden depths of you tonight. Now, why would the mind do such a thing? Why would it bother to paint these nightly portraits at all? Here is where Jung's idea becomes, I think, genuinely beautiful. He believed the psyche, that is just his word for the whole of the soul, the whole of the inner person, conscious and unconscious together. He believed the psyche is a self-regulating system. Let me give you a homely picture for that because it is easier to feel than to define. Think of your own body lying there in the warm dark. Think of how it keeps itself in balance without you ever telling it to. When you grow too warm, you begin to sweat, and the sweat cools you. When you grow too cold, you shiver, and the shivering warms you. You do not decide to do these things. You do not lie awake thinking, I had better produce some sweat now. Your body simply tends to itself. It is always quietly steering back toward the middle, toward balance, toward what doctors call homeostasis, which is a grand word for a simple, tender thing, the body's gift for keeping itself level. Too hot, it cools, too cold, it warms, always returning to center, always taking care. Jung said the soul does exactly the same thing, and the dream is one of the ways it does it. So picture it like this. In your waking life, you lean. We all lean, we cannot help it. We become too much of one thing and not enough of another. And the dream, like the sweat that cools the fevered body, leans the other way, quietly, to bring you back to level. Here is how it shows up, and I think you will recognize it once I say it. Suppose a man has grown puffed up. Inflated, Jung would say, like a balloon swollen tight with too much air. He has begun to think very highly of himself. He walks through his days, certain of his own greatness, looking down a little on the people around him, sure that he is wiser, stronger, more important than he truly is. By day, nothing corrects him. The world flatters him or stays silent. But at night, the dream comes. And the dream does not flatter. The dream shows him slipping on the ice in front of a laughing crowd, or standing in a great hall, about to give a speech and discovering he has forgotten his trousers, or shrinking small and foolish before someone he had thought beneath him. The dream deflates him. It lets the air out of the balloon. Not to cruelly mock him, never that, but to bring him back down to earth, to his true size, because a person who floats too high has lost touch with the ground, and the soul, in its wisdom, wants him whole and steady, not swollen and adrift. And it works the other way too, just as tenderly. Suppose a woman has shrunk. She has grown too timid, too small, too quick to apologize for taking up any space at all. By day she creeps along the edges of rooms, certain she has nothing to offer, certain everyone is stronger and surer than she is. The waking world rarely lifts her up. But at night, the dream comes. And it does not scold her smallness, it bolsters her. It shows her standing tall on a hilltop with the wind in her hair, or speaking clear and unafraid before a crowd that listens, or carrying something heavy with an ease she did not know she had. The dream gives her, in the dark, the strength her daylight self has forgotten she owns. It fills in what is missing. It leans her back toward the center, toward her own true size, which is neither swollen nor shrunken, but simply, fully herself. Do you feel the shape of it now? Too high and the dream brings you down, too low and the dream lifts you up, too much one thing and the dream offers the other. Not to oppose you, not to argue with you for the sake of arguing, but to restore you, to make you level, to return you to balance, the way the body returns to its even temperature, the way the small boat rights itself when you stop leaning. That is compensation. That is the dream's great, quiet, tireless work, performed for you every single night, whether you remember it in the morning or not. Let us explore a story about this. A small one, to let the idea sink in the way warmth sinks into cold hands. There was once a baker in a small town, a good baker, well known for his bread. And over the years, as his bread grew famous and the line outside his door grew long, the baker began to grow proud. He came to believe that his hands were touched by something special, that no one in the whole region could match him, that the town was lucky, privileged even, to have him. He stopped greeting his customers warmly. He grew short with his apprentice, a quiet boy who had worked beside him faithfully for years. He no longer tasted his own bread before he sold it, because surely, he thought, a man of his gifts could never make a poor loaf. And one night, in the deep middle of the night, the baker had a dream. In the dream, he was standing in his own bakery, but it was empty. No customers, no line. No warm smell of rising dough. The ovens were cold and dark, and there, sweeping the floor in the dim light, was the quiet apprentice boy. Only in the dream the boy was the master baker now, and the flowery aprons hung in his honor, and the townspeople came one by one through the door to thank the boy for his beautiful bread. And the proud old baker stood in the corner of his own shop, forgotten, holding a broom, watching another man receive the love that he had stopped earning. He woke with his heart aching and could not understand why. Now the baker did not know any of the long words. He had never heard of compensation, or the unconscious, or any Swiss doctor of the soul. But something in him understood the dream anyway, the way our bodies understand a fever long before we have a name for it. He lay there in the dark and he felt, slowly, the air go out of his pride. He remembered the boy's patient hands. He remembered that he had not thanked a single customer in a year. And in the morning, quietly, without telling anyone why, he tasted his bread before he sold it. He greeted the first woman through the door by name. He taught the boy something new about the crust. The balloon had been gently, kindly deflated in the night, and the man it set back on the ground was a better one, truer, more his own size. That is what the dream was doing. It was not punishing him. It was caring for him the only way it could, by showing him, in pictures, the part of himself his daylight pride had hidden from view. It was leaning him back toward balance. It was the soul tending to itself, the way the body cools its own fever. And here, now, gently, is the part I most want to give you as you lie there in the warm dark. This is not just an old idea about an old baker. This is about you. If you have ever woken from a dream that puzzled you or troubled you, or seemed at first to make no sense, Jung would say, do not throw it away. Do not call it nonsense. Ask instead this one quiet question. What might this dream be balancing? What might it be adding that my waking days have left out? Where, lately, have I been leaning too far? And might this be the gentle hand reaching out to set me level again. You do not have to answer tonight. You do not have to answer at all. The question itself is enough. It is a kinder way to meet your own dreams than to fear them or dismiss them. Because if Jung was right, then the dreaming part of you is not your enemy. It is not trying to trick you or scare you or torment you for sport. It is, in its strange and picture-painting way, on your side. It is the part of you that keeps you whole. The part that knows when you have leaned too far and reaches out in the dark without judgment, without scolding, only to help you stand level again. So whatever you dream tonight, or whatever you dreamed last night, or years ago, the dream you have never forgotten, you might let it be that. Not a riddle to solve, not a fright to flee, but a kind of care painted in pictures offered to you by the deepest part of yourself while you slept. Let us pause here for a little while. There is no hurry to go on. Take a slow, deep breath. Let it come all the way down the way we did at the start, and let it go even slower than you drew it in. Notice how your body has grown a little heavier against the bed, a little softer since we began. Notice the quiet in the room. Notice that there is nothing in this moment that you need to do, nothing to fix, nothing to figure out. The dream tends to itself. The body tends to itself. The night tends to you, and you can simply rest in the middle of all that tending like a small boat finally come to still water. When you are ready, and only when you are ready, we will continue together. We will go on to a man named Sigmund Freud, who believed your dreams were lying to you, hiding their true meaning behind a disguise. And we will see how Jung, looking at the very same dreams, came to believe the exact opposite, that the dream is not a liar at all, but the most honest voice you have. We will follow him down, floor by floor, into a strange old house he once dreamed of, a house that ended a great friendship and changed the way we understand the human soul. But that is in a little while. For now there is just your breath, slow and easy, and the warm dark, and nothing at all that you must carry. So let yourself stay here, level and held, in the quiet, for as long as you like. And so we will sit a moment longer in this stillness before we go on, because the thing we are about to look at is worth approaching slowly. You see, most of us, without ever quite deciding to, carry one particular idea about our dreams. We picked it up somewhere, from a film, from a half-remembered conversation, from the general air of the last 100 years. The idea is this, that a dream is a kind of code, that underneath the strange pictures there is a hidden message, and the message has been deliberately scrambled, like a secret note passed in a classroom, folded small so the teacher cannot read it. We believe without examining it that the dream is hiding something from us, that it is, in some quiet way, dishonest. That idea has a name behind it, and the name is Sigmund Freud. Freud was a doctor in Vienna, and in the year 1900 he wrote a book called The Interpretation of Dreams. It is one of the most famous books ever written about the sleeping mind, and a great deal of what ordinary people believe about dreams, even now, even people who have never read a word of it, comes down to us from that book. Freud's idea was bold and strange and, for its time, almost scandalous. He said that a dream is a wish you are not allowed to have while you are awake. A buried longing, often from very early in your life, often tangled up with desires you would be ashamed to admit even to yourself. And because the wish is forbidden, Freud said, it cannot show its face plainly. So the dream dresses it up. It disguises it. It turns the real thing into a symbol, a costume, a stand-in, so that the sleeping mind can let the wish out for a little air without ever quite admitting what it is. Freud had words for these two layers. The part of the dream you actually remember, and the house, the staircase, the stranger, the falling, he called the manifest content, what you can see. And the hidden thing underneath, the true forbidden wish, he called the latent content, what is really meant. And between them, doing all the disguising, he imagined a kind of inner guard, a censor, whose whole job was to keep the latent content from showing through too clearly. The work of twisting and hiding and rearranging so the wish could slip past the guard, Freud called that the dream work. Do you feel how that picture works on you? It is a clever picture. It says, your dream is a locked room, and somewhere there is a key, and behind the door is something you did not want to see. It makes the dream into a puzzle, and yourself into the one who must crack it. And to find the hidden meaning, Freud had a method. He called it free association. You take some piece of the dream, let us say a key that appeared on a table, and you simply let your mind wander away from it. The key makes you think of a door, the door of a lock, the lock of your childhood home, the home of your father of a particular afternoon. You follow the thread of your thoughts away, link by link, wherever it leads, on the idea that it will lead you, in the end, to the buried wish. Now hold that picture gently, because here is where the young Swiss doctor steps in and turns the whole thing over. For a while, Jung and Freud were close. More than colleagues, Freud, who was the older man, the famous man, seems to have thought of Jung almost as a son, an heir who would carry the work forward, and Jung admired him deeply. But Jung kept running into something he could not square with Freud's picture. He sat with people's dreams, night after night, year after year, and the dreams did not behave like liars. They did not seem to be hiding. They seemed, if anything, to be trying very hard to be understood, speaking the only language they knew, the language of pictures, and seeming obscure to us only because we had never been taught to read that language. Jung put it very simply. The dream, he said, is a normal happening of the mind that carries the reactions and the impulses of the unconscious up into the light of waking, so that we might know them. Carry up into the light, not bury, not disguise, the very opposite. That word, opposite, is not too strong. Freud said the dream conceals. Jung said the dream reveals. Freud said there is a guard who keeps the truth from you. Jung said there is no guard at all, only a voice speaking plainly in a tongue you have forgotten. And he had a quiet, deadly objection to free association, to that wandering away from the image. He said, if you wander far enough from any starting point, you will always end up somewhere significant, somewhere sore, somewhere tangled. It does not matter where you begin. Start with a key, start with a tree, start with a number on a door. Wander long enough, and you will arrive at the same handful of wounds. And so, Jung said, free association can tell you about the person, but it cannot tell you what this dream, this particular dream with these particular pictures, is trying to say. Because you walked away from the pictures the moment you began. You left the room you were meant to stay in, so Jung stayed in the room. He had a different way, and he gave it a different name. He called it amplification. Instead of wandering away from the dream image, you stay with it. You sit beside it. You gather around it everything that belongs to it. First, what it means to you in your own life, your own memories, the private weight it carries. But then you widen the circle. You bring in the old stories, the myths, the images that humankind has made of this same thing across the long centuries. If you dream of a great tree, you do not run away from the tree. You stand under it, You ask what the tree has meant to you, and then what trees have meant to people everywhere, in their tales and their pictures and their dreams since the very beginning. You enrich the image until its meaning glows up out of it on its own. You do not crack the dream open, you let it bloom. And underneath both of these ideas, the staying and the revealing, runs the one thing we spoke of before you rested: compensation. The dream is the part of you that you are not living, rising up to set you level again. For if the dream were only a disguised wish, as Freud believed, then it would be forever pulling backward toward the buried and the forbidden. But if the dream is honest, as Jung believed, if it is the deepest part of you, painting a true picture of where you actually stand tonight, then it is not pulling you backward at all. It is trying to make you whole. It is showing you the floor you have been refusing to walk on, the room in the house you have kept locked, the part of yourself you left out of the daylight. And here is the gentle, unsettling heart of it, the thing we will sit with all through this night. That stranger in the dream, that figure you fear or pity or cannot understand. Jung came to believe that more often than not, that figure is not really someone else at all, it is you. A part of you, dressed as another, come to be seen at last. Let us breathe with that for a moment before we follow Jung down into his strange old house. So take a slow, deep breath and let it go even slower. There is nothing here to crack open, nothing to decode. The honest voice speaks whether or not you understand it tonight, and it is patient, and it will speak again tomorrow, and the night after that, for as long as you need to hear it. You do not have to listen hard, you only have to rest. And when you are ready, only then, we will go on, down the floors of that old house, to the cave where Jung found something that changed everything, and lost a friend, and began to understand the soul. There is a story Jung told more than once, a story about two men who looked at the same dream and saw entirely different things. Not because one was careless and the other attentive, not because one was smarter or more experienced, but because they were asking different questions, and the question you bring to a dream shapes everything you find there. The two men were Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung themselves. The dream was Jung's. The year was around 1909. They were traveling together by ship to America, both of them invited to lecture at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. And during those days at sea, they spent long hours analyzing each other's dreams. It was an extraordinary intimacy. Two of the most serious minds in the study of the human interior, sitting across from each other, trying to read each other's depths. Jung offered Freud a dream. Freud asked for more personal details, more associations, more threads that might lead back to some buried wish. And Jung, who was still loyal to Freud at that point, still his chosen successor in some ways, gave him the associations as best he could. But something didn't fit. Something in Freud's questions kept pulling the dream away from what the dream seemed to actually be about, and towards something else entirely, toward the hidden, the sexual, the infantile. Freud could hear the dream only in one language, and that language, Jung was slowly beginning to feel, was not the dream's own. He did not say so, not yet. But the feeling gathered. To understand what divided them, and why it matters for you tonight, lying here with your own dreams behind you and more waiting in the dark ahead, we have to go back a little further. We have to understand what Freud believed, and then we have to understand what Jung came to believe instead. Sigmund Freud published The Interpretation of Dreams in the year 1900. It is one of the most consequential books written in the last 2 centuries, and its central claim was this: the dream is a disguised fulfillment of a repressed wish. Not just any wish, primarily an infantile wish, a wish so old and so unacceptable to the waking, conscious, civilized mind that it cannot be allowed through undisguised. So the mind, in sleep, disguises it, wraps it in symbols, scrambles its logic, runs it through what Freud called the dream work: condensation, displacement, representation, and secondary revision, until it no longer looks like what it is. The wish slips past a kind of inner censor, Freud said, precisely because it no longer resembles itself. This is why, in Freud's framework, there are two layers to every dream. The manifest content, what you actually dream, the story, the images, the events as they appear, and the latent content, the hidden, censored, true meaning underneath. The manifest content is the disguise, the latent content is the wish, and the job of interpretation is to strip away the disguise and find what is really there beneath it. It is an architecture of concealment. The mind, in Freud's view, does not want you to know what you truly desire. The dream is a kind of compromise, a way for the forbidden material to find some release, some expression, while the conscious mind sleeps on, undisturbed, protected from its own deepest impulses by the fog of symbolic transformation. Now, there is something almost beautiful in that idea, something that explains a real phenomenon: the strangeness of dreams, the way they seem to speak in riddles, the way ordinary things appear in impossible arrangements, the way a face you know wears the expression of someone else. Freud was not wrong that the dream does something. He was not wrong that the dream connects to things we do not readily admit in daylight. The reach of his thinking, the seriousness with which he took the dreaming mind, was a genuine revolution. We should say that clearly, but Jung's unease was also genuine, and it grew. Jung's counter, stated plainly, directly, in his own words, was this: the dream is a normal psychic phenomenon that transmits unconscious reactions or spontaneous impulses to consciousness. And the key word, the word that changes everything, is transmits. Not disguises, not encodes, not conceals. The dream transmits. It carries something forward from the unconscious toward the waking mind in the most honest language available to it, which is the language of symbol and image, because that is the native tongue of the deeper layers of the psyche. In Jung's view, the dream does not primarily lie. It does not protect you from yourself. It does not hide its meaning behind a mask that must be ripped away to find the truth. The dream seems obscure only because we have not learned its language, not because the language is designed to deceive. Think of someone speaking to you in a language you never studied. Their words might seem like noise, like symbols without meaning, not because they are hiding something from you, but because you have not yet learned to listen the right way. The dream, Jung said, is exactly that. It speaks. It speaks honestly and in its own tongue, and the work of interpretation is not code-breaking, it is translation. This is a genuinely different claim, and it is worth sitting with because most of us, whether we know it or not, carry the Freudian assumption inside us. We tend to think of our own dreams as a kind of scrambled transmission, a jumbled mess of imagery that might mean something if we were clever enough to decode it, but is fundamentally untrustworthy on its surface. We approach our dreams as though the images themselves are red herrings, mere decoration over a hidden truth. And that assumption changes everything about how we relate to our inner life. It makes the dreaming mind into something slightly suspicious, something that must be interrogated rather than listened to. Jung asked, what if the image itself is the message? What if the snake, the house, the ocean, the stranger? What if these images are not masks over something else, but honest attempts by the deep self to say, in the clearest way it knows, exactly what is so? That does not make interpretation unnecessary. The images still need to be received, pondered, placed in context, but it means the starting posture is entirely different. Instead of asking, "What is this image hiding?" you ask, "What is this image showing me?" Instead of suspicious excavation, patient attention. Let us explore a story about this, something to hold alongside the theory. A parable, openly offered as a parable, not history. Imagine a woman, let us call her Hannah, a composer, meticulous and serious about her work, someone who values discipline above almost everything. She wakes one morning from a dream in which she has been playing music in a meadow, barefoot in long grass, and the music she is playing is formless and free, nothing like her careful compositions, nothing like anything she would normally allow herself to produce, and she is laughing. In the dream, she is laughing. When she wakes, her first feeling is something close to embarrassment, as though she has been caught doing something slightly undignified. Under a Freudian lens, the question would turn immediately toward what is being concealed. What forbidden wish is the laughter disguising? What does the barefoot meadow represent in terms of some infantile longing she has repressed? The investigation begins by moving away from the surface, the meadow, the laughter, the formless music, and looking for the thing underneath. Under a Jungian lens, the question is different. The question is, what is this image taken honestly on its own terms, telling Hannah about the situation in her psyche right now? And the answer is almost immediately legible. Hannah has given herself entirely to discipline and structure. She has cut off the playful, spontaneous, formless part of her creative life. The dream is not disguising that fact, it is showing it to her, clearly, with feeling. The meadow and the laughter are not symbols hiding a wish, they are images of what is missing. The unconscious, in Jung's formulation, is compensating for the one-sidedness of her waking life by vividly presenting what that life lacks. The meadow is honest, the laughter is honest, the barefoot ease is honest. Not because they are literal, Hannah is not literally trying to run barefoot through a meadow, but because they are an accurate portrait of what her inner life is asking for and what her outer life is refusing to give. This is what it means that the dream transmits rather than disguises. The transmission is not always comfortable. It may show us things we would rather not see, but it is not trying to trick us. It is trying to help. Now, back to the ship. Back to Jung and Freud crossing the Atlantic, reading each other's dreams, and the slow, quiet widening of a crack. The dream, Jung told later, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, the memoir he dictated in old age to Agnella Jaffe, was the dream of the house. He dreamed he was in a house with many floors. The upper floors were well furnished, bright, familiar, clearly inhabited and belonging to the present. As he descended, the floors became older, medieval on one level, then older still, Roman with heavy brick walls and vaulted ceilings, and below that a cave carved from the rock, clearly ancient, prehistoric, with shards of pottery and two old skulls lying in the dust. When Jung described this dream to Freud, Freud pressed him about the skulls. Whose death did they represent? Was there a death wish involved? The question circled back, as Freud's questions tended to, toward the human being in the dream as a figure of desire or fear or forbidden impulse, toward the skull as a symbol of something wished for or dreaded in the realm of personal life. Jung felt, even as he obligingly followed the thread, that this was not the right question. The skulls, to him, did not feel like a personal symbol at all. They did not feel like a reflection of something from his own biography, some repressed emotion toward a person in his life. They felt ancient. They felt like something that predated him entirely, like a room in the psyche that no individual had put there because it had always been there, because it belonged to the species, not to any single man. The multi-story house, as Jung later understood it, was a map of the human mind itself. The upper floors were consciousness, modern, present, the personality we move through the world with. Descend a level and you find the personal unconscious. Older material, things forgotten or pushed aside from one's own experience. Descend further still and you reach something deeper, something that the Roman vaulting and the Stone Age cave together suggested. Layers of the psyche that are not personal at all, that belong to humanity as a whole, accumulated over centuries and millennia. The collective unconscious. This was not yet a word for it. It would take years before the concept crystallized and acquired its name and its theoretical architecture. But the house dream was, in some important sense, the image from which it grew. It was the unconscious presenting its own structure to him in a form he could walk through. He descended floor by floor, and at the bottom he found not something personally repressed, but something ancestral, something that predated not just his own life, but the lives of his grandparents and their grandparents and everyone he had ever known. Freud saw the skulls and thought, someone is going to die in this man's life, or this man wishes that someone would. He read the dream on the personal level. Jung looked at the same image and felt, very quietly, that he was looking at the record of the human species, the bones of something far older than any single psyche. Two men, one dream, entirely different questions. There was another dream during this period, sometimes called the customs official dream or the crusader dream. The precise details vary slightly depending on which account one reads, but its significance in Jung's own telling was that it helped him clarify his sense of where he stood relative to Freud. Not politically, not professionally, but psychically, in terms of what each man actually represented to the other, and what Jung's own psyche was trying to show him about that relationship. On the subjective level, the dream figures were not just people. They were parts of Jung himself. His relationship to authority, his ambivalence, his own independence, pressing against the boundaries of discipleship, because that is what it was for a time. Discipleship. Freud had chosen Jung as his intellectual heir, the man who would carry psychoanalysis beyond Vienna, beyond Freud's own Jewish and European world, and Jung had accepted the role with real admiration, with genuine love even, because Freud was extraordinary and the relationship was extraordinary, and for a time it seemed as though they were working toward the same thing. But a theory is a living thing. It grows where it needs to grow, not where its creator intended. Jung kept encountering material in his patients' dreams and his own that the personal wish model could not hold. Images that were too old, too strange, too charged with a kind of numinous quality that had nothing to do with anything from the patient's biography. Images that appeared in the dreams of people in Zurich that also appeared in medieval manuscripts, in the mythology of cultures those patients had never studied, in the sacred imagery of traditions from entirely different parts of the world. The same figures, the same shapes, the same motifs appearing spontaneously in dreaming minds with no apparent personal source. Jung began to suspect that the psyche had inherited structures, patterns, not contents, not specific memories, but shapes of experience that were shared across human beings regardless of culture or history. The archetypes, not a dream dictionary, not a catalogue of symbols with fixed meanings. He would argue passionately against that misreading for the rest of his life. But structural tendencies, recurring patterns of psychic organization that gave rise to similar images in different dreaming minds because they arose from a layer of the psyche common to the species. And this conviction, slowly hardened into theory, was incompatible with Freud's model. Not because Freud was wrong about everything, but because the question Jung was now asking, where does this image come from, pointed toward an answer Freud did not have room for and did not want. Freud's architecture was built for the personal, for biography, for the repressed contents of one individual life. When Jung said, "No, this image seems to come from somewhere beneath the personal, somewhere older and shared," Freud heard it as mysticism, as regression, as a softening of the hard-won scientific territory they had claimed together. The break came around 1912 and 1913, publicly marked by the publication of Jung's book Wandlungen und Symbole der Libido, later translated into English as Symbols of Transformation. In it, Jung treated the libido not as a specifically sexual energy, as Freud had insisted, but as a more general psychic energy. He read mythological material, especially the imagery of a young American woman named Miss Frank Miller, whose fantasy material had been published, and found in it the patterns that were forming into his theory of the archetypes. The book was, in several senses, a declaration of independence, and both men knew it. The personal relationship did not survive. The letters became colder, then stopped. The wound was real on both sides, and Jung later acknowledged that the years immediately following the break were among the most difficult of his life, a long period of inner disorientation, of dreams and visions of unsettling force, of what he later called his confrontation with the unconscious. Those are the years that gave him his deepest material, the years in which the very things he was theorizing about, the unconscious, the archetype, the compensatory dream, came alive in his own experience with a vividness he could not dismiss and could not entirely explain. The flood vision belongs to this period. In 1913 and into 1914, Jung experienced a series of recurring visions, not just ordinary dreams, but waking visions of great force, in which he saw a monstrous flood covering Europe, blood in the water, wreckage, and drowning. He was disturbed by them. He wondered whether something was breaking down in him psychologically. Then in the summer of 1914, the First World War began, and the whole continent was plunged into exactly the kind of catastrophe he had seen in his visions. He was careful, always, about how he framed this. He did not claim he had literally predicted the war through supernatural means. He suggested that his unconscious had gathered what his conscious mind had not yet assembled. The tremors of political tension, the cultural atmosphere of Europe in those years, the accumulated weight of forces that were building toward a rupture, and had presented this gathering catastrophe in the symbolic language of vision and dream, before the conscious intellect had the evidence to name it. The prospective function. The dream or vision as a rough draft of what the psyche, with its subtler and wider perception, can sense coming before the waking mind has caught up. We will return to that prospective function later. For now, what matters is this. The break with Freud was not just a professional quarrel, it was a philosophical one. A question about the nature of the dreaming mind itself. And the two positions divide cleanly on one fundamental choice. Freud said, "The dream is fundamentally a product of the past, pulling toward the buried wish, the old desire, the infantile longing that civilization requires us to repress. The direction of the dream is backward, and the dream lies about where it is going, wrapping itself in imagery that misleads." Jung said, "The dream is fundamentally oriented toward the present situation of the psyche and toward what the psyche needs in order to move forward. The direction of the dream is equilibrium, and then beyond equilibrium towards something like growth or integration. And the dream does not lie, it speaks its own truth in its own language, and that language can be learned. These are not minor differences, they are different cosmologies of the inner life. They give rise to entirely different relationships with one's own dreaming mind. If Freud is right, you spend your life as a kind of archaeologist of your own depths, digging toward hidden ruins. If Jung is right, you spend your life in something more like a conversation, with a part of yourself that is always present, always watching, always trying to tell you something you need to hear. Let us sit with that distinction for a moment, because it is worth feeling rather than just thinking. In the Freudian universe, your dreaming mind is, in some sense, your adversary, or at least your obstacle. It must be outmaneuvered, its disguises stripped away, its defensive structures broken open. The work of self-knowledge is confrontational. It demands that you overcome your own resistance, expose what your mind has hidden, even from yourself. There is a drama of uncovering in it, and the drama requires that you and your dream are, at some level, on opposite sides. In the Jungian universe, your dreaming mind is, in some sense, your ally. Imperfectly understood, speaking a language you have not fully learned, sometimes alarming in its imagery, yes, but not against you. Oriented toward your wholeness, reaching toward you night after night with something you need. The work of self-knowledge is not confrontational. It is receptive. You do not outwit your dream. You listen to it now. You may be lying here thinking, that sounds beautiful, but is it true? And that is a fair question, and one to hold lightly. Jung was offering a framework, a way of reading the inner life, not a set of laboratory-verified facts. The modern neuroscience of sleep, which we will touch on later, the discovery of REM sleep in 1953 by Aserinsky and Kleitman, the subsequent decades of dream research, has not confirmed the Jungian model in any specific way, and has not confirmed the Freudian model either. What it has suggested, among other things, is that dreams tend to reflect the concerns and preoccupations of waking life, a finding sometimes called the continuity hypothesis, which sits more comfortably alongside Jung's idea that the dream reveals the actual situation in the psyche than alongside Freud's idea that the dream hides something entirely different from what appears. But we are not settling a scientific debate tonight. We are listening to a man who spent 60 years paying very close attention to the dreaming mind, his own and other people's, and who developed a set of ideas that have proven, for many people, genuinely useful. Not because they are provably true in the way that the laws of physics are true, but because they offer a way of relating to one's inner life that is kinder, more productive, and more honest than what most of us received by default. Let us explore another small story to make the Freud and Jung difference something you can feel rather than just think about. Two friends, let us call them Riku and Soren, both dream the same image on the same night by coincidence. In the dream, they are each standing in a vast, empty house, and every door they try is locked. Every room is sealed. They call out and hear nothing. Riku goes to a Freudian analyst. The questions come: what locked doors have you known? What has been kept from you? Who controls access to things you want? The associations unwind. A father who was emotionally unavailable, a childhood home where certain rooms were forbidden, an old grief about exclusion. These associations are real and meaningful and worth knowing. The interpretation eventually settles on the locked doors as a symbol of repressed desire, of something longed for and forbidden from early experience, still pressing against the present. Soren goes to a Jungian analyst. The questions are different. Not where does this lead when you follow the chain of association, but what is this image right now in the context of your actual life? Soren, it turns out, has spent the last year making himself very small, retreating, closing off possibilities, not opening them, saying no to opportunities out of fear, convincing himself that none of the doors are really for him. The locked house, in Jungian terms, is a compensation on the objective level, a portrait of the psyche's actual situation, rendered exactly as it is. The house is locked because Soren has been locking it himself. The dream is showing him that, honestly, directly, in the only language it has. Both interpretations might contain something true. The Freudian reading might illuminate something real about Riku's history. The Jungian reading might illuminate something real about Soren's present. The question is not which one is always right, but which question tonight with your dream serves you better. And Jung believed that for most people, in most situations, the more useful question is the one that stays close to the present image, the present life, the present situation in the psyche, rather than always tunneling backward toward the past. There is something else Jung objected to in Freud's method, something more practical, more grounded in the actual mechanics of dream interpretation. And this is where free association comes in. Freud's primary interpretive method was free association. From a dream image, you begin to speak whatever comes to mind, freely, without censorship, following the thread wherever it leads. And wherever you begin, wherever you pick up the thread, the associations tend eventually to lead toward the complex, the charged material, the buried thing. Freud took this as evidence that the method was working, that the free chain of association was pulling the hidden material toward the surface. Jung saw something different in this. He noticed that free association will lead away from any starting point toward the complex, toward the emotionally loaded material, regardless of which image you start from. You could begin with the locked door, or you could begin with the sky above the house, or you could begin with the color of the carpet, and the free associative chain would eventually arrive at something charged and significant, which meant, Jung argued, that the method tells you about the complex, about the charged material in the person's psyche, but it cannot tell you what this particular image, this specific dream, means, because the method does not stay with the image, it leaves it. Jung called his own method amplification, and it worked quite differently. In amplification, you stay with the image, you do not free associate away from it, you enrich it, you gather more associations to it, both personal ones from the dreamer's own life and cultural, mythological, historical ones from the wider human tradition. You hold the image in the center and bring more to it, rather than letting it be a departure point. The image gets denser, richer, more layered, and what it is, rather than what it leads to, becomes clearer. If you dream of a snake, the Jungian analyst does not immediately begin following the chain of your associations away from snake toward whatever comes next, and then whatever comes after that. Instead, the analyst asks you to stay with the snake. What do you feel looking at it? What kind of snake is it? Where is it in the dream? What is it doing? And alongside your personal relationship to snakes, your own history with them, your own feelings and memories, the analyst brings the cultural and mythological weight of the snake image, the serpent in the garden, the healing caduceus, the Ouroboros eating its own tail, the snake as death and as rebirth across dozens of traditions. Not to find the universal correct meaning of snake, Jung explicitly and firmly rejected the idea that any symbol has a universal fixed meaning, but to illuminate the full range of what the snake image carries so that the specific meaning for this dreamer in this dream, in this life, can emerge more clearly. We will return to amplification and to the dream series a little later. For now, let us take one more breath with what we have opened tonight. Freud and Jung were both looking at the same phenomenon, the strange, vivid, often disturbing or beautiful theatre of the sleeping mind. Both took it seriously at a time when many dismissed dreams as mere noise. Both built enormous, serious structures of thought around what they found there, but they arrived at fundamentally different conclusions about what the dream is for and how it speaks. Freud: the dream disguises. It wraps a wish in imagery to protect you from your own depths. The surface is a mask, and the work is excavation. Jung. The dream reveals. It presents the actual situation of the unconscious as honestly as it can in symbolic form. The surface is not a mask, but a message, and the work is learning to read it. This is not a small difference. It is the difference between a dreaming mind that is fundamentally against you and a dreaming mind that is fundamentally for you. And for many people, perhaps for you, lying here tonight, the Jungian starting point opens something. A softening. A possibility that the strange theatre playing out behind your closed eyes is not a puzzle to defeat, but a companion to listen to. And that companion, Jung believed, is showing you something very specific. It is showing you where you actually are, not where you think you are, not where you wish you were, where you actually are in the landscape of your own inner life tonight. There is more, and we will get there gently. The strange figures who walk through your dreams. The recurring nightmare that will not stop until you understand it. The way to read not one dream, but a whole long conversation between your waking self and the self that only speaks at night. All of that waits ahead, but for now let us pause here, let us breathe. Take a slow, deep breath. Let it move all the way down. Let your shoulders fall. The house dream, the flood of blood. Two men on a ship, reading the same dream and finding entirely different worlds inside it. You do not need to hold any of that carefully right now. You do not need to remember which year or which book or whose name belonged to which idea. If any of it stayed, if one image settled somewhere in you quietly, that is enough. It is more than enough. Notice whatever has begun to ease in you as the body settles further into the dark and the quiet. There is nothing required of you tonight except this rest. And when you are ready, only when you are ready, we will continue and go further in to the strange figures waiting in your dreams. And so we go further in. We have been talking about what the dream is doing and the compensating, balancing, honest labor it performs in the dark. Now we come to something that may feel stranger at first, and then, when it settles, may feel like the most useful thing you take from any of this. We come to the question of who is in your dream, because there are always figures, aren't there? A person you recognize, a person you don't, a stranger behaving in ways that disturb you, a friend doing something entirely unlike themselves, a face that belongs to someone from 20 years ago, someone you haven't thought of since, stepping through a door as naturally as though they had been waiting just behind it all along. And the natural question, the one we almost always ask first, is, what does this person represent? Is my mother in my dream because I am thinking about my mother? Is my old boss appearing because there is something unresolved between us? Is the threatening stranger a warning about someone in my waking life I should be afraid of? Jung had a name for this way of reading. He called it the objective level of interpretation. On the objective level, a dream figure is treated as a representation of the actual person. Your real mother, your real boss, the real colleague whose face appeared last night. And there are times, Jung acknowledged, when this is the right way to read a figure. If you have a dream about someone you genuinely haven't processed, a real relationship that is genuinely unfinished, the objective level may be exactly where you need to start. But Jung noticed something that changed the way he worked with almost every dream he encountered. He noticed that when you read a dream figure as referring to the actual person outside you, you often hit a wall. The dream doesn't quite cohere. The behavior of the figure doesn't match the real person well enough. Something in the image feels off, pushed slightly sideways from reality. And when that happens, which is most of the time, Jung argued that you are being invited into a different way of reading entirely. He called it the subjective level of interpretation. At the subjective level, every figure in your dream is understood as a part of you, not the real person outside you, but an aspect of your own psyche that has taken on that person's face in order to speak. Your cruel boss in the dream is not really your boss. Your cruel boss is your own inner critic, the voice inside you that measures, finds wanting, and diminishes, given a body and a face so that it can walk towards you and be seen. Let us sit with that for a moment, because it changes everything. On the subjective level, your dream is not a report about other people, it is a report about you. Every person who walks through that night theatre is a character in an interior drama. They are facets of your own inner life, dressed in borrowed clothes, playing out a relationship that is actually happening inside you, right now, whether you know it or not. Jung thought this was the more useful way to read a dream almost every time. Not because the people in your waking life don't matter, of course they do, but because the dream is not primarily about your waking life. It is about the situation in the unconscious. And the unconscious maps itself, draws itself, stages itself in human figures. Those figures are the psyche's way of making something interior visible. They are the shapes that inner things take when they need to be seen. Let us explore a story about this. There was once a woman, let us call her Marta, a teacher in her middle years, well liked by her students and regarded by her colleagues as steady, patient, and reasonable. She took some pride in this. Steadiness and patience were things she had worked at carefully over many years. She had come from a family where voices were raised and doors were slammed, and she had made herself into someone who did neither. This felt like an achievement. She was not wrong to feel it. But she began to have a recurring dream. In the dream, her colleague, a woman perhaps a few years older, someone Marta found vaguely irritating in waking life but nothing more than that, appeared and behaved with a kind of cold, imperious authority. This colleague in the dream would say cutting things, would dismiss Marta's ideas in front of others, would look at her with a steady contempt that felt very specific and very real. And Marta would wake from these dreams feeling unsettled, not quite sure what to do with the residue. Her first instinct, naturally, was to read the dream on the objective level. There was something unresolved with this colleague. Perhaps she needed to address it. Perhaps she was more bothered by this woman than she had admitted. She turned the dream over in her mind and tried to identify what, in the real relationship, was causing it. But the dream kept coming. The colleague kept appearing, kept being cruel, kept looking at Marta with that same cold dismissal. And Marta, who had, in fact, very little real conflict with this person, began to wonder if the dream was actually about the colleague at all. She brought the dream to a dream group and someone asked her a question that she did not expect. They asked, "Does the figure in the dream remind you of any quality in yourself? Is there any part of you that is like this woman, cold, dismissive, judgmental?" Marta was quiet for a long time, and then she said very carefully that she had worked very hard not to be like that she had spent her whole adult life being the opposite of that, patient and measured and reasonable and fair. And the person listening said gently, "Yes." And where does the other go? That was the question that opened something, because Marta had not eliminated the cold, dismissive voice. She had silenced it, disciplined it, pressed it down into a place where she could not see it. She had made herself reasonable and patient on the surface, which was real and good and worth keeping. But the other part, the part that judged, that cut, that found people wanting, had not disappeared. It had moved underground. It lived in her still, in the place she could not see. And it was appearing in her dream as her colleague's face. Not because of anything true about the colleague, but because the psyche needed Marta to look at something she had been carefully refusing to look at. When Marta began to acknowledge this, not to act on it, not to become cruel, but simply to acknowledge that this thing was also inside her, the dream changed. The figure softened. The contempt in the colleague's eyes became something more complicated and more human, and after a while the dream stopped. This is what the subjective level is offering, not a diagnosis, not a verdict, not an accusation that you are secretly the thing you most dislike, but an invitation to see the whole of yourself, including the parts that live in the shadow. Take a slow, deep breath. Just here, at this turn in the road, let the breath come in fully and let it move all the way out. You do not need to do anything with what you just heard. You do not need to search your own mind right now for what might be hidden there. You are going to sleep. Just notice if anything has shifted, even slightly, in how you hold the strange figures that visit you at night. And when you are ready, we will go further, because we have arrived at the shadow. This is one of Jung's most enduring ideas and also one of the most misunderstood. The shadow is not your enemy. It is not the dark, evil part of you that should be kept locked away. It is not the proof that something is wrong with you. It is, quite simply, everything you are that you have not yet acknowledged. Everything that did not fit into the self you built, the careful, presentable self that knows how to function in the world, got pushed to one side, not destroyed, just set aside underground in the dark. And the shadow, Jung observed, has a way of making itself known. It appears most commonly in dreams as a figure of the same sex as the dreamer. This is worth pausing on, because people often expect their shadow to look different, to be obviously sinister, to announce itself with dramatic signals. But Jung found that the shadow most often wears an ordinary face. It is the person in your dream who irritates you unreasonably, the one who behaves badly, the one who acts in ways you find contemptible or frightening or just profoundly wrong. And the emotional register of the reaction is the key. When a dream figure provokes a disproportionate response, when the anger or fear or disgust you feel toward them in the dream is bigger than the dream situation would seem to warrant, that is often the signal. That excess is the signal. The psyche is generating heat at this spot, and the heat is trying to tell you where the unlived territory is, because what we reject in others is very often what we have rejected in ourselves. Let us explore a story about this. There was a man, let us call him Thomas, who had been, for most of his adult life, known for his reliability. He showed up. He did what he said. He was the person his friends called when something needed doing and doing properly. He thought of himself as someone who did not take shortcuts, who did not cut corners, who did not let the standards slip. He began dreaming of a figure, always a man, roughly his age, always slightly familiar, though he could never quite place the face, who was lazy, spectacularly, infuriatingly lazy. This figure in the dream would show up at a shared task and do the minimum, would do it badly, would seem not to care, not to be troubled by the gap between what was possible and what he was producing. Thomas would wake from these dreams furious, a clean, righteous fury that felt completely justified. He mentioned the dreams once, almost in passing, to someone he trusted, and the person asked him something that sat with him for days afterward. The person asked whether Thomas had ever, in his life, given himself permission to rest. Thomas thought about this, and what he came to, slowly and reluctantly, was that he had not. That the reliability and the standard and the doing it right had been very real and also very demanding, and that somewhere along the way he had stopped being able to simply stop. He could not sit without something being accomplished. He could not rest without it feeling like failure. The lazy man in the dream was not someone Thomas feared becoming. It was something Thomas had forbidden himself to be. Ease, softness, the right not to be useful every moment, and had locked away so completely that it could only appear at night in someone else's face, where Thomas could safely despise it from a distance. The lazy man was not the enemy. The lazy man was the part of Thomas that needed, urgently, to be allowed to lie down. This is the shadow's invitation, always, not to become the thing you see, but to stop spending so much energy fighting it, to look at it without that disproportionate fury which is so exhausting to carry, to find inside what seemed like contempt, something a little more like compassion for the parts of yourself that got left behind. Jung was careful to say that integrating the shadow does not mean unleashing it. Thomas does not have to become unreliable. Martyr does not have to become cruel. What changes is the relationship. You stop performing the war against the unlived part, and you start having a quieter, more honest relationship with the whole of what you are. The dream is the beginning of that. The dream is where the hidden part of you first gets a face. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice the quiet around the breath. Notice that you are held here, safe and still, and that whatever lives in the shadow of your own interior is not a danger to you in this moment. It is just something waiting to be known. And when you are ready, we will continue. Because the shadow is not the only figure that walks through your dreams. There are others, figures that carry a different kind of charge, a different quality of strangeness. And among the most significant of these in Jung's framework are the figures that belong to the opposite. Jung called them the anima and the animus. This is where the language becomes a little careful, because Jung was writing in a time and from a set of assumptions about gender that do not map cleanly onto how we understand these things now. What he was pointing at, though, is something worth attending to, regardless of how the language has aged. The anima in Jung's framework is the unconscious feminine dimension in a man. The animus is the unconscious masculine dimension in a woman. These inner counterparts, the other side of the psychic coin, tend to appear in dreams as figures of the opposite sex. A mysterious woman who keeps appearing in a man's dreams, a dark or powerful male figure who appears in a woman's. And the relationship a dreamer has with these figures is significant, because Jung believed the anima and animus carry what the conscious personality has not owned or developed on that axis. A man who has built himself on the values of rational analysis and controlled emotional expression may find, in his dreams, a woman who is moody, irrational, unpredictable, which is the psyche's way of insisting that those qualities, those emotional depths, are also his, however loudly his waking self denies them. A woman who has been taught to make herself small, to defer, to keep her own knowing quiet, may find in her dreams a man who is authoritative, direct, certain, which may be carrying her own unlived capacity for intellectual conviction and assertion. Neither the anima nor the animus is fixed. Jung described both as having multiple facets capable of appearing in many forms and deepening in character as a person grows. At their most undeveloped, they can appear as something glamorous and consuming, a kind of inner compulsion. The anima as a woman a man cannot stop thinking about. The animus as a voice that seems to know everything and never stops commenting. But as they are met, attended to, brought into conscious relationship, they become something more like guides. They carry what is needed. Let us explore a story about this. There was a man, let us call him David, who worked in a field that prized precision. He was good at precision. He was proud of precision. He had learned, in school and then in work, that the feelings you had about a problem were beside the point. What mattered was the analysis. What mattered was the logical chain. He had learned to be quiet about anything that couldn't be measured, and he had gotten quite good at not noticing that he was quieting anything at all. He had a dream that recurred for several years. In the dream, there was a woman, always the same woman, though he could not have described her face clearly in the morning, only the feeling of her. She would be standing somewhere that he was trying to reach, and he would be trying to reach her, and there would always be something in the way. A locked door, a corridor that went wrong, a gap in a bridge. He would wake from these dreams with a longing that was entirely out of proportion to anything in his waking life, and he did not quite know what to do with it. He tried, at first, to locate her in the real world, to find the woman in waking life who corresponded to the one in his dream. He thought at various times that he had found her. He was usually wrong. The real women in his life were more complicated and less luminous, and somehow always disappointing in ways he couldn't entirely articulate. What he came to understand over a long time was that the woman in the dream was not outside him. She was carrying something in him that had no other way to be known. She was the bridge to a part of his own inner life that his waking self had systematically closed off. The part that felt, that grieved, that wondered, that was moved by things that couldn't be measured. The longing in the dream was not for a person. It was for himself, whole. When David began, very carefully, to attend to this, to notice what moved him, to let himself be briefly moved, to stop interrupting the feeling before it finished, something changed. The woman in the dream, when she appeared, was still elusive. But the locked door was less often locked. The corridor more often arrived somewhere. And the longing, while still present, had changed its quality. It had become something more like direction. This is what the anima and animus are offering in Jung's view, not a literal person to find, a depth of your own interior life that is waiting for you to turn toward it, a dimension of yourself that cannot speak in the language your waking mind uses, but that knows how to give things a face, a presence, a pull strong enough to reach you even through sleep. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the breath carry you a little further down into the quiet. You do not need to know exactly which of these figures lives in your own dreams. You do not need to name it or classify it or get it right. The dream does not require your understanding in order to do its work. It only asks gently to be noticed, and when you are ready, we will go on. We come now to something that matters enormously for anyone who has ever opened a book with a title like Dream Symbols and Their Meanings, or looked up in any kind of reference what it signifies to dream of water, or flying, or a house, or a snake. Jung would like you to put the book down. Not because the images don't matter, they do. Not because symbols are meaningless, they are very far from meaningless. But because the idea that there is a fixed correspondence, that water means emotion, that the snake means danger or sexuality or transformation, the same for every person who has ever dreamed. This is exactly what Jung spent his career arguing against. He rejected the dream dictionary, flatly, explicitly, and for a very specific reason. The reason is this: the same image can mean opposite things depending on who is dreaming it and what their life has been. A snake appearing in the dream of someone who grew up in a place where snakes were sacred healing symbols carries an entirely different charge from a snake appearing in the dream of someone whose early experience of snakes was terror. Water, in the dream of someone who nearly drowned, carries a completely different weight from water in the dream of someone who grew up on a river and associates it with freedom and childhood and the best days of their life. The image is not the meaning arises from the meeting of the image with the particular person's life, and that is why you cannot outsource the interpretation of your own dream to a book. No book knows your life, no symbol key knows what water meant in your grandmother's house, or what snakes meant in the neighborhood where you grew up, or why a specific color or sound or object consistently carries a feeling in your interior life that no general dictionary would predict. Jung called this the personal context, and he treated it as irreplaceable. The personal associations, what this image has meant in your experience, what it connects to, what charge it carries in the specific texture of your biography, are the necessary ground for any interpretation. Without them, you are reading a translation of a translation. You are reading someone else's dream. And yet there is also something else. Jung observed that some images seem to arise with a force and strangeness and luminosity that goes beyond the personal. Some symbols appear in dreams with a weight that feels almost mythological. Images that have appeared in human stories, human art, human sacred texts across cultures and across centuries. Images that carry an ancient quality even when the dreamer has never knowingly encountered them before. He called these archetypal symbols, and the dreams in which they appear most vividly he called big dreams or numinous dreams. A big dream has a particular quality. You know it when you wake from it. The ordinary dreams of nightly processing, the running through the to-do list dreams, the recycled anxiety dreams about being late or underprepared or lost in a familiar place. Those are the small dreams, the bread and butter of the psyche's nightly maintenance. They matter, they are worth attending to, but they have a scale and texture of the ordinary. A big dream is different. It arrives with a weight and strangeness that makes you sit up in the dark and feel that something has happened. The imagery is vivid beyond ordinary vividness. The feeling persists into the day in a way that is hard to shake. There is a quality of import about it, even before you understand what the import is. Jung associated these big dreams with major life transitions. They tend to appear at thresholds: a death, a birth, a marriage, the end of a long chapter, and the beginning of an unknown one, the approach of something in a person's life that requires a profound inner rearrangement. And the imagery that arrives in them tends to draw on what Jung called the collective unconscious, which brings us to an important distinction, because these two things, the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, operate differently, and they give rise to different kinds of dream. The personal unconscious is exactly what it sounds like. It is the accumulated interior of your particular life. The forgotten memories, the unprocessed experiences, the parts of yourself that didn't fit neatly into the person you needed to become. The material of the personal unconscious is biographical. It belongs to you. When it appears in dreams, the personal associations are the primary interpretive key. The collective unconscious is something else. Jung proposed it as the deeper layer beneath the personal, a layer that is not built from individual experience but is, in some sense, structural, inherited, shared. Not the memories of your life, but the patterns that have shaped human beings across the full span of human history. The recurring motifs of human experience, the same themes appearing in myths and fairy tales and religious texts from cultures that never had contact with one another, the structures that human beings have been living inside since long before any of us individually arrived. The archetypes are the patterns within the collective unconscious, the shadow, the anima, the animus, the wise old man, the great mother, the self. These are not figures that any one person invented. They are recurrent forms in the human psyche's way of knowing itself across all times and all places. When they appear in a dream, they carry a weight that reaches deeper than the personal. Let us explore a story about this. There was a woman, let us call her Elena, who had spent her 30s in a period of sustained, grinding difficulty. The specifics do not matter and are not ours to know. What matters is that she had come through something and was beginning, slowly, to feel that she was on the other side of it. Not restored to what she had been, she was not that person anymore, but beginning to be something else, something she did not yet have a name for. One night, she had a dream so vivid that it woke her at 3 a.m, and she lay in the dark for a long time afterward, not sleeping, not wanting to move. In the dream, she was in a large, open space, not indoors, not outdoors, something in between, lit with a quality of light that felt ancient. And at the center of the space was a circle, a perfect circle, drawn on the ground. Inside the circle were 4 points, 4 directions, and she understood, in the way you understand things in dreams without needing to be told, that she was to stand at the center. She stood there, and there was a feeling of completeness so profound that she could not speak about it for days afterward without the feeling returning, quieter but recognizable. She had never studied Jung, she had never read about mandalas or quaternities or the self. She did not know when she woke that what she had seen was one of the oldest and most consistent symbols in human visual history. The circle divided into 4, appearing in Buddhist mandalas and Native American medicine wheels and Gothic rose windows, and the cross at the center of a Celtic circle across every culture that has ever drawn the shape that says center, wholeness, all 4 directions held together. Jung documented this image arising in the dreams of patients at particular moments, almost always moments of inner reorganization after a period of fragmentation or crisis. He called these mandala dreams. He believed they were the psyche's way of representing the self. Not the small, everyday self of the personality, but the self as Jung understood it, the center and totality of the whole psyche, the goal of what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming more fully oneself. Elena did not need to know any of that. The dream did its work without any of the vocabulary, but the vocabulary for those who want it is there. The self, the mandala, the quaternity, 4 elements, 4 directions, 4 aspects of wholeness gathered into a circle. These are the archetypal images that appear in what Jung called the big dreams, the ones that arrive not from the ordinary maintenance layer of the psyche, but from the deepest structural layer, the one that knows the shape of what it is trying to become. The personal dream says, this is what you are carrying right now, in this moment of your particular life. The numinous dream says, this is the shape of the whole. This is the direction of the current that has been moving under everything. And the distinction matters because you work them differently. The personal dream, you work with personal associations. What does this image mean in my life? What has it meant before? What is happening in my waking days right now that this might be responding to? The big dream, you work with amplification at not just your personal associations, but the wider resonance, the mythological parallels, the ways this image has appeared in the human story across time, because those parallels enrich your understanding of what the image is carrying, what territory it is mapping. Jung was clear that amplification does not replace personal association. You begin with the personal, always. And when the personal associations have been explored and something in the image still seems larger than they account for, that is when you look to the wider human resonance, not to replace your own meaning with a general one, but to illuminate the depth behind the particular. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the breath be long and easy. Notice the weight of the night around you, the quiet that has been here all along. steady underneath the words. You do not need to decide right now which kind of dream yours are. You do not need to categorize the dream you had last week or the one that has been coming back. Just notice that there are layers, that the same image might belong to your particular biography, or might be drawing from something older and wider, or might, as images often do, be doing both at once. And the most honest thing you can take from all of this is also the most freeing. No one can read your dream for you, not a book, not a dictionary, not even the most careful practitioner working with you thoughtfully over many months without knowing what the image means in the context of your particular lived experience. The dream is yours. The language of your dreams is yours. And it is worth learning, not as a system to master, but as a relationship to develop. The way you develop any relationship, by paying attention over time without insisting that you already know what you're going to find. There was once an elderly man, let us call him Ari, who had kept a dream journal for most of his life, not because he had studied psychology or been in analysis, but because a very wise old woman he had once known had told him when he was young that his dreams were trying to tell him something and that it was worth writing them down. So he had 50-some years of dreams written in the morning in notebooks he kept on the shelf beside his bed. He did not claim to understand most of them. He was comfortable with that. He would write them down and then read them back sometimes weeks or months later, and sometimes something would click, a connection between the dream and something that had happened, something he'd been avoiding, or something he'd been moving toward without knowing it. What he noticed over time was that the images were consistent. There were certain images that came back in different forms across the years, carrying a recognizable quality. Water appeared when he was in transition. A particular kind of house, a very large and complex house he had never lived in, appeared when he was at a crossroads. And a figure, an old man, always the same old man, though he could never describe his face precisely, appeared at the moments of deepest difficulty and deepest decision. Ari had not set out to decode these images. He had not looked them up. He had simply sat with them long enough, over time enough, that he had come to understand their language. His language, not the language of any dictionary, the language that had grown up between him and his own interior life in the long, quiet conversation of 50 years. He called it his second weather. The way some people check the sky before they leave the house, he would notice what had come in the night and use it the way you use weather, not as destiny, but as information. Something worth knowing before you head out into the day. This is what Jung was pointing at with all of his careful methodology and his volumes of collected works and his seminars and his concepts and his named archetypes. Underneath all of it was something very simple. Pay attention over time, without insisting on certainty. Let the images speak in their own language and give them enough time to make themselves clear. The Dream Dictionary wants to give you certainty quickly. A snake means this, a house means that, water means the other. Fast, portable, easy. Jung was impatient with this, and the impatience was generous. It was an impatience on your behalf, because you deserve better than a dictionary. You deserve the actual conversation, which takes longer and yields something real. Let us breathe here once more. Take a slow breath, unhurried. Let the body continue to settle, the way a house settles at night, creaking quietly into its own weight, finding its level. What we have been exploring in this part of our evening together has been the question of who speaks in your dreams and what they are speaking about. The figures in your dreams, the cruel boss, the threatening stranger, the mysterious woman, the man with the steady authority, the one who does the thing you most despise, are, in Jung's view, very likely aspects of yourself. Your disowned qualities, your unlived dimensions, the parts of you that did not fit into the person you have built for waking life. The shadow wearing the face of someone your waking self can safely project its discomfort onto. The anima or the animus, carrying the contrasexual depth that the conscious personality has left in the dark. And the symbols that appear in your dreams, the images that populate that inner theatre, do not have fixed, universal meanings. They have your meanings built from your experience, your associations, the particular texture of your biography, and sometimes, at the big moments, they carry something wider. The ancient shapes that human beings have drawn and told and known across all the long centuries, the archetypal images that arise from the deepest layer of what we share. You do not need a dictionary. You need a relationship with your own interior. You need time and patience and the willingness to sit with an image long enough to let it tell you something in its own language rather than the language you brought to it. And this, all of this, is just one layer of what Jung had to offer. Because there is still the question of what to do when the dream keeps coming back. When the same nightmare visits you again and again, wearing the same shape, carrying the same feeling, as though it is waiting for something, there is still the question of how to read not one dream, but the whole long conversation. There is still the practical question of tonight, of what you can actually do quietly with what you have heard in this slow evening together. All of that waits just a little further along. We will get there together. But for now, rest here. Let the images we have been with tonight begin to soften and settle, the way images do when you stop trying to hold them and simply let them be. The shadow, somewhere in the dark, not an enemy. The anima and the animus, not a person to find, but a depth to turn toward. The circle on the ground, 4 directions, a center that was always already there. The old man and his 50 years of notebooks, his second weather. You do not need to remember any particular name or any particular concept. If something settled in you, if one image or one idea found a quiet home somewhere inside the listening, that is enough. It is more than enough. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the night hold you. We are almost through the hardest material, the material that required the most attention, the most careful following. What comes next is, in some ways, the most practical part. The recurring dream, the dream series, the long conversation, and a few very simple things you can take with you tonight from all of this. But that is for when we continue. For now, the breath, the quiet, the body resting in the dark. There is nothing to figure out. There is nowhere else to be. There is a dream that comes back. Not always in the exact same form. Sometimes the room is different. Sometimes the face has changed. But the feeling is identical, or in that particular quality of dread or urgency or sadness that you wake from and carry into the morning like something you cannot quite put down. You have been in that house before, or on that road, or standing at the edge of that water, and the whole weight of it is familiar in a way that ordinary dreams are not. Jung had a name for what was happening. He called it the recurring dream, and he treated it with a kind of respectful seriousness that is worth sitting with for a moment. He did not think the repetition was mechanical. He did not think the mind was simply stuck in a groove, playing the same record because the needle had nowhere else to go. His understanding was closer to this. The psyche is trying to tell you something, and it will keep trying in the same language, with the same image, until you have actually heard it. The way a person might knock on a door, gently at first, then more firmly, then persistently, not out of aggression, but out of genuine need. The recurring dream, in Jung's view, is a persistent communication. It arises because the conscious attitude has not yet integrated what the dream is offering. Something in how you are living, some way you are holding yourself, some aspect of your situation that you have not fully faced or understood, keeps generating the same response from the unconscious. The dream repeats because the message has not been received. This is a different way of thinking about the dreams that frighten you most, not as a malfunction, not as a symptom to be suppressed, but as a persistence, something that has been trying for however long to reach you. Jung noticed something else about recurring dreams. They very often date from specific periods of life. A recurring dream that has been with someone for 30 years may have begun in childhood or in adolescence, or at some particular turning point. A loss, a transition, a moment when something in the person's life required a response that was never fully given. The dream attaches itself to the unresolved thread and follows it forward through time. Let us explore a story about this, a simple one. A woman had dreamed since her early 20s of trying to speak in a room full of people and finding that no sound came out. She would open her mouth, she would push against the silence in her throat, and nothing would emerge. The people in the room would continue their conversations, not unkindly, simply not hearing her. She would wake from the dream with a specific kind of frustration. Not anger, exactly, but something quieter and more aching. The sense of having something to say and no way to say it. The dream came back for years, sometimes monthly, sometimes less. But it came. In her late 30s, through a period of genuine reckoning with the choices she had made, choices to defer, to agree, to keep the peace in rooms where she had felt her own opinion was somehow too much. Something began to shift. It was not dramatic. She did not have a single revelation, but slowly, in the particular way that real things move, she began to let herself speak. In small ways, in the places closest to her first, the dream changed. First, it became less frequent. Then, in one of the last versions, she opened her mouth in the room, and a sound came out, not a full voice, but something, the beginning of one. And then, over the months that followed, the dream did not return. Jung would have recognized that pattern immediately. He believed that recurring dreams often stop or transform once the issue the dream is marking has been consciously grasped, or the life situation has changed in the direction the dream was pointing. The cessation is not accidental. It is the unconscious acknowledging that the message has finally arrived. There is nothing more to repeat. This is one of the most quietly verifiable things in dream life. Not in a laboratory, but in the long experience of anyone who pays attention to their dreams over years. The dreams that return most persistently are the ones connected to the places in us that are most stubbornly unacknowledged, and when the acknowledgement finally comes, the returning stops. The door that was being knocked on has opened. Take a slow breath here, there is no hurry. What comes next is something Jung thought was even more important than reading any single dream, even a recurring one. It is the practice of reading dreams together, not one at a time, but as a series, a running conversation that unfolds across weeks and months and years. He was quite direct about this. He believed and wrote explicitly that a single dream should rarely be interpreted in isolation. One dream is like a single sentence pulled from the middle of a long book. You can make guesses about what it means, but you will miss the arc, miss the development, miss the way it answers an earlier question or anticipates a later one. What the unconscious has to say cannot usually be contained in a single night's image. The dream series is the working unit. The whole sequence of dreams from one person, read together over time, is where the real meaning begins to emerge. Jung worked this way with his patients, and he described something remarkable. The series of dreams is self-correcting. If an interpretation of an early dream turns out to be wrong, if the dreamer and the analyst have misread the direction or missed the real weight of an image, later dreams in the series will tend to flag the error. A new dream will arrive that seems to contradict the earlier one, or that presents the same motif in a different and clarifying light, as though the unconscious is gently saying, "You were looking at it from the wrong angle. Look again." He compared the series to a sequence in which the unconscious corrects itself, or rather, corrects the interpreter. The unconscious is not finished. It is not making a single statement and waiting for applause. It is engaged in an ongoing process, a long attempt to bring something into view, and it uses each new night as another attempt, another angle, another image offered in the hope of finally being understood. This changes how you think about the dream journal, which is the most practical tool Jung would have recommended for anyone who takes their inner life seriously. The journal is not a collection of curiosities. It is not a museum of strange nightly events. It is the record of a conversation. And like any conversation worth having, it requires that you look back, that you read what was said last week alongside what is being said tonight, and notice the thread running between them. There is a man, let us say, who begins keeping such a journal in his mid-40s. He is going through a period of change, not dramatic change, but the quiet, grinding sort that arrives in the middle of life and does not announce itself clearly. Over the first weeks, his dreams seem scattered, unconnected. A strange figure in a marketplace, a room he cannot find his way out of, his childhood home with an unexpected door. He writes them down. He does not try too hard to interpret them immediately. He simply records what he saw and what he felt. After several months, he begins to read back through, and he notices something. The door. It appears in different forms across many dreams. A door in the familiar house, a gate in a garden, a threshold at the edge of a known territory. Always slightly different, always present, always, in one way or another, the question of whether to pass through or stay. He had not noticed it as a theme from inside the individual dreams. He had only noticed it from the view of the series. Looking back across weeks of nights, reading them the way you read chapters, the unconscious had been working on one question, steadily, from multiple directions, and he had not seen it until he read the long version. This is the gift of the series. It hands you the map that no single dream could carry. Jung wrote and spoke about this at length, including in the seminar transcripts known as the Dream Analysis and Visions seminars. He worked with individual people's dream series over extended periods, sometimes years, watching the themes evolve, watching the psyche move through phases and return to earlier motifs with new understanding, watching the arc of a whole inner life begin to come visible through the accumulated images of sleep. Rest here for a moment. Let that settle. There is the question of how, practically, you work with a dream, not just that you should, but what you actually do when you sit down with one. And this is where Jung's method diverges most sharply from Freud's, not just in theory, but in technique. Freud's approach to a dream was built on what he called free association. You take a dream image, say a bridge, and you let your mind move away from it freely, following the chain of whatever thought or feeling or memory it calls up. That chain will lead, Freud believed, toward the complex, toward the underlying anxiety or wish that the dream is covering. The bridge might suggest a journey, the journey might suggest a departure, the departure might suggest a person who left, and eventually you arrive at what you were really dreaming about. Jung had a specific methodological objection to this. He pointed out that free association will lead away from any starting image toward a complex. but that this is not because the image is the key to the complex. It is because any image whatsoever can be used as a starting point for free association, and the chain will arrive at the same destination regardless of where it begins. Start with the bridge. Start with the word table. Start with this morning's breakfast. If you follow free associations far enough, they will lead you somewhere psychologically charged. That is the nature of the associative mind. This means, Jung argued, that Freud's method cannot tell you what this particular image means. It only tells you where the patient's current energized complex is located. The image itself becomes irrelevant. A door, a bridge, a face. It does not matter. They all lead the same place. And Jung thought this was exactly wrong. He thought the specific image mattered enormously. He thought the unconscious chose this bridge, this face, this house for reasons, and that the task of interpretation was to find out why this image and not another. His own method was what he called amplification. Instead of following the chain away from the image, you stay with it. You circle it. You ask the dreamer, what does a bridge mean to you specifically? Not bridges in general, but this bridge, in this dream, with this quality. You gather the personal associations that belong to this particular symbol in this particular life, but you do not stop there. Alongside the personal, you bring the cultural, mythological, and historical parallels, the appearances of bridges in myth and folklore and religious tradition, in the stories that human beings across very different times and places have told about what bridges mean. Not to replace the personal meaning, but to enrich it, to hold it up in a wider light, to see whether the personal resonance connects to something older and broader. This is the amplification method. You move inward toward the image rather than away from it. You deepen around it rather than departing from it. And what you are looking for is the place where the personal and the universal meet, where the dreamer's own particular life is illuminated by the fact that something similar has been dreamed and felt and made into story by people across many centuries and many cultures. There is a quiet power in this. To discover that the dream you have been carrying, the one that seemed so strange and private, touches a mythological theme that appeared in ancient texts, in folk tales, in the religious imagery of traditions far from your own. This is not diminishing. It does not make your dream smaller. It makes it larger. It places your inner life inside the whole long story of human inner life. You are not alone in your strange nightly country. You are a part of something continuous. Let us take a moment here, the breath, the quiet, whatever you can feel of the body, the weight of it, the warmth of it, resting. We are moving now towards something Jung spoke of with particular care, the question of whether dreams can lean forward in time as well as comment on the present. He called this the prospective or anticipatory function of dreams, and he was genuinely cautious about how he framed it, which is worth paying attention to. His claim was not mystical. He was not saying that dreams are prophetic in the supernatural sense, that they literally foretell the future through some channel that lies outside ordinary cause and effect. He explicitly distinguished his position from literal prophecy. What he was saying was something more contained and more interesting. The unconscious, in Jung's view, has access to something the conscious mind often does not, the full picture of the present, the subliminal perceptions, the things we have noticed without knowing we noticed them, the patterns we have taken in below the threshold of attention, the subtle signals from the body, from relationships, from situations unfolding around us. All of this is available to the unconscious, even when it has not yet assembled itself into a conscious understanding. And because the dream draws on this richer informational pool, it can sometimes sketch a trajectory, a rough draft of where things are heading, before the waking mind has caught up. Not because it sees the future, but because it sees the present more completely. He compared it to a kind of internal diagnostician, a physician who notices subtle early signs and says, if this continues, here is what will likely follow. The anticipation is based on perception, not magic. It is the consequence of seeing more clearly. Now, with that qualification carefully in place, Jung was also willing to describe his own experiences, and one of them stands as one of the most striking and contested passages in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. In the years 1913 and 1914, as he was navigating the aftermath of his break with Freud and working through a period of intense inner crisis, Jung experienced a series of dreams and waking visions that he found deeply disturbing. In these visions, he saw a great flood sweeping across Europe, a vast, engulfing catastrophe, yellow waves carrying the wreckage of civilization, seas turning to blood, countless thousands of people drowning. The visions were vivid and overwhelming. He worried, he wrote, that they might be signs of an approaching psychosis in himself. Then in August of 1914, the First World War began. Jung described this convergence in his memoir with a kind of awed, troubled honesty. He was not certain what to make of it. He did not claim he had seen the future in a supernatural sense. What he believed was that the collective unconscious, that deep layer shared across humanity, the layer beneath the personal, had been registering the tensions building in Europe, the pressures accumulating in the collective psyche of an entire civilization, and that his dreams and visions had been transmitting that registration to him. Not a prophecy, a perception so wide and deep that it outran what any individual conscious mind could have assembled in 1913. He offered this not as proof of anything, but as an example, a personal, reported example of the prospective and collective dimension of the unconscious, offered with the qualification that he knew it could not be verified as he had experienced it, and that others might read it differently. This is Jung at his most honest, not claiming more than he can hold, but not pretending the experience was less than it was. This is also, in some ways, the most important thing to understand about Jung's relationship to these ideas. He was a scientist by training, a psychiatrist, someone who had worked in a hospital and had seen the full range of human psychological disturbance up close. He did not abandon that grounding. But he also was not willing to dismiss the parts of inner experience that did not fit neatly into the frameworks of his time. The strange correspondences, the vivid, numinous dreams, the sense that the unconscious was operating at a scale that exceeded the personal. He held both. He lived in the tension of both. And he trusted that the tension was more honest than any premature resolution would be. Let us rest here for a moment. The night is deep now. Let the breath be easy. There is one more bridge to lay before we come to the practical, and it is worth laying it clearly. Jung was not a neuroscientist. He was working in the first half of the 20th century in a clinical tradition that had no access to the tools that would come later. The electroencephalograph, the laboratory, the careful mapping of the sleeping brain. His framework was built from clinical observation, from personal experience, from the careful reading of mythology and religious tradition, and from the decades of work with patients' dreams. It is a framework of depth, of human meaning, of the interior life. It is not an empirical theory in the strict scientific sense. Decades after Jung's death, the scientific study of sleep moved in a different direction entirely. In 1953, two researchers, Eugene Aserinsky and Nathaniel Kleitman, identified REM sleep, the rapid eye movement phase of sleep, during which the most vivid, narrative dreaming takes place. This discovery opened a new chapter in the scientific understanding of what dreams are and why they happen. a chapter built on measurements, on controlled conditions, on the kind of evidence that can be replicated in a laboratory and subjected to rigorous review. Modern empirical theories of dreaming include things like the continuity hypothesis, which suggests that dreams tend to reflect the concerns, preoccupations, and emotional currents of waking life, that what matters to you while you are awake tends to show up in some form in your dreams, and the threat simulation hypothesis, which proposes that dreaming may serve in part as a kind of rehearsal space for the mind's emotion regulation systems, a place where fear and threat are processed and worked through in a context that carries no immediate danger. These are different frameworks from Jung's. They operate at a different level of description, the level of brain states and observable behavior, rather than the level of symbolic meaning and psychic structure. They are not the same as analytical psychology, and it would be a mistake to pretend they are. But it is worth noting, quietly and without overstating it, that the continuity hypothesis, the idea that dreams reflect the actual concerns of waking life, is not entirely at odds with what Jung observed. When he wrote that the dream is a spontaneous self-portrayal of the actual situation in the unconscious, he was saying something that resonates, at least loosely, with the idea that the dream reflects what is really happening in your psychological life. The specific mechanisms he proposed, compensation, archetypes, the collective unconscious, are not validated by neuroscience and should not be presented as though they are. But the basic orientation, the sense that dreams are not random noise but reflect something real about the inner life, is one that both traditions, in their very different ways, tend to arrive at. What Aserinsky and Kleitman gave us, and what the science of sleep since 1953 has built on, is the knowledge of when dreaming happens and something of the brain states that accompany it. What Jung gave us is a language for what to do with the content once you have it, a framework for reading the images, for understanding what they might be pointing toward, for engaging the inner life with seriousness and depth. These are not competing answers to the same question. They are answers to different questions. Both are real, both are worth having. And with that said, let us come to the most practical thing of all, what you can actually do tonight or any night that follows this one. The simplest and most foundational practice Jung would have recommended is this. Write it down. Keep a journal, not an elaborate one, not a journal that requires any particular skill or analysis or knowledge of Jungian theory. Simply a small notebook beside the bed. And when you wake, before the dream has had time to dissolve into the morning, before the first demand of the day has arrived to overwrite the images of the night, write down what you saw. Not just the plot, the feeling, the atmosphere, the quality of the light, the presence of a particular figure, the sense of a place, the emotion you woke carrying, all of it without interpretation at first, without trying to make it mean something, simply to preserve what was there. This matters because most dreams left unrecorded are gone within minutes. The memory of a dream has a particular fragility. It dissolves faster than almost any other kind of memory, as though it was never quite material to begin with. Writing it down is the act of making it material, of giving it a form that can be returned to, of saying this was real enough to save. Then, over time, read back through. Look for the threads, the recurring images, the figures that appear in different guises but carry a similar quality, the themes that surface across weeks, across months, questions of connection or separation, of movement or stuckness, of voices or silence. Let the pattern emerge without forcing it. The series will speak if you give it time to accumulate. And when you sit with a particular dream, a dream that seems to want attention, try this. Instead of asking what it means in the abstract, ask what it is compensating for. What aspect of your waking attitude is it addressing? Are you living too narrowly in some direction, too cautious, too controlling, too accommodating, too cut off from feeling? The dream does not announce this directly, but it offers an image of what you are leaving out, a figure you have been ignoring, a place you have been avoiding, a quality that has been asking to come forward, and then ask, who are the figures in this dream and what would it mean if they were you? This is Jung's subjective level of interpretation, and it is the one that tends to be the most uncomfortable and the most useful. The threatening figure in your nightmare? Could it be a part of you that you have not made room for? The person in your dream who is saying what you have always wanted to say, is that also you? The child, the animal, the stranger, each of them a possible image of some aspect of your own inner life that has not yet been brought into the full light of your self-understanding. You do not have to be certain. You do not have to force an interpretation that does not feel right. Jung himself was deeply respectful of the limits of interpretation. He knew that a wrong reading does no good, and that the unconscious will offer corrections if you are paying attention to the series. You are not looking for the definitive answer. You are learning the language. You are showing up for the conversation. Start small. One dream recorded, one thread noticed over several weeks, one question asked, not answered definitively, just asked, about what a figure in the night might represent if it were a part of you. That is enough to begin. It has always been enough to begin. Let us stay with that for a moment. The breath, the body, heavy and warm, the room around you dark and quiet. There is nothing to do with any of this tonight. Not one thing needs to be resolved or understood or figured out. The only thing that tonight requires of you is to let yourself rest. And now, before we settle fully into the quiet, let us walk back slowly through everything we have been with. Not to remember it, not to hold it, but simply to let it be here one more time before the sleep closes over everything. We began with the compensatory function. The idea that the dream is the part of you that you are not currently living, showing up in the night to restore a balance. The psyche as a self-regulating system, not unlike the body's own steady work of homeostasis. The constant quiet adjustment that keeps you whole. The dream is not an enemy of your waking self, but a counterweight to it, offering what you have left out, what you have pushed aside, what you have been too busy or too frightened or too fixed in your habits to see. We were with Freud for a time, and the deep and real difference between his understanding and Jung's. Freud, who believed the dream disguises, who saw the manifest content as a mask over the latent content, the dream work as a censor slipping wishes past the gate in coded form. Jung, who believed the opposite, that the dream does not lie, that it is not hiding anything, that it is honest in its own symbolic language, and that it seems obscure only because we have not yet learned to read it. The break between the two men around 1912 and 1913 crystallized in part through a single dream, a house descending through floors into a cave of human skulls, which each man read differently, and which helped Jung understand that he and Freud were not simply exploring the same territory from slightly different angles, but working from fundamentally different visions of what the unconscious is. We were with the subjective level of interpretation, the unsettling, freeing, extraordinarily useful idea that the figures in your dreams are, most often, figures of you. The cruel one, the kind one, the frightened one, the one who speaks with confidence. All of them parts of your own inner household, showing up in costume as other people, asking to be recognized. We were with the shadow, that particular uncomfortable presence, the threatening or inferior same-sex figure who carries what you have not yet claimed in yourself. And with the anima and the animus, the inner woman in the man, the inner man in the woman. The contrasexual depth that asks not to be projected endlessly onto the people outside, but to be met at last within. And with the self, that deepest center, appearing in images of circle and quaternity and wholeness, the compass rose and the mandala, present long before anyone named it, and present still. We walked through the dream dictionary and why Jung rejected it, the liberating, frustrating truth that there is no key, no lookup table, no fixed meaning that a snake or a bridge or a house carries for every human being in every life. The same image that means death for one person means healing for another. And only the life of the dreamer decides, which means that the work of reading your dreams is yours. It cannot be delegated. No book can do it for you. The meaning lives at the intersection of the universal image and your irreplaceable particular life. We were with the recurring dream, and the understanding that its repetition is a persistence. The psyche knocking at a door that has not yet opened. That recurring dreams often date from specific moments, transitions, losses, times when something was required that was never fully given, and that they tend to stop or to change once the message they carry has finally been received. The door opened. We were with the dream series, the understanding that a single dream is rarely enough, that the unconscious speaks across time in a long conversation, that later dreams comment on earlier ones and correct the mistakes of interpretation, that the thread of a life's inner movement becomes visible only when you read many chapters together rather than one at a time. We were with amplification, the practice of staying with the image rather than following the chain away from it, of circling it with personal associations and mythological depth, of asking why this image and not another, of finding the place where the particular life and the ancient human story meet. We were with the prospective function, the idea that dreams can sometimes sketch where things are heading, not through magic, but through the unconscious's access to what we have perceived without yet consciously assembling. And we were with Jung's own contested, honestly offered account of the flood of blood visions of 1913 and 1914, and what he believed he had been registering in those dark months before a world war began. We made the bridge carefully to the modern science of sleep, to Aserinsky and Kleitman and the discovery of REM sleep in 1953, to the continuity hypothesis and the emotion regulation frameworks that a different tradition, using different tools, has built in the decades since. Not the same as Jung, not a validation of his specific metaphysical claims, but not entirely foreign either. And we came to the simplest, most practical thing: write it down, watch the series, ask what is being compensated, ask who the figures are and what they might be if they were you. These are the things Jung spent a lifetime working with in himself and in the people who came to him in distress and confusion and hope. He did not promise resolution. He did not offer a system that would unlock the secret once and for all. He offered a way of paying attention, a respectful, unhurried, genuinely curious way of sitting with the inner life and taking it seriously. And what you came here tonight, perhaps without knowing exactly what you were looking for, was something like that. A way of thinking about the strange country of sleep that treats it not as noise but as communication, not as meaningless neural firings but as a language worth learning, not as something to solve and be done with but as a companion for the long interior journey of a life. You do not need to remember any of this, not the names, not the terms, not the specific arguments. If something settled in you tonight, if one image, one idea, one small shift in how you think about the dream you keep having or the figure you keep meeting in sleep, if one thing landed quietly and found a home somewhere inside the listening, that is more than enough. It is the only thing that was ever needed. The dream will come again. Some version of it. Some night it will be there. The familiar house, the face at the edge of recognition, the feeling you have been carrying for years. And maybe now there will be the beginning of a different way to meet it. Not with fear, not with the urgency to decode it and be done, but with something closer to what Jung himself brought to the images of the night. A kind of patient, respectful curiosity, the willingness to sit with the strange and ask what it is and listen for the answer across time. The unconscious is not your enemy. It never was. It is the part of you that never stopped trying to make you whole. Sleep well tonight. Let whatever you have been carrying set itself down beside the bed. Let the images come or not come, settle or not settle. Let the night do what the night does. There is nothing to figure out in the dark. Enough stories for one night. Off to sleep now, Grandpa says.